Next from Springfield, we attend a panel conference from the Alliance Leadership Summit with Dr. Brent Clark, the Executive Director of the Illinois Association of School Administrators, and Roger Eddy, the Executive Director of the Illinois Association of School Boards, along with other education officials, as they discuss the Vision 2020 Education Reform Plan and the future of public education in Illinois. But first, we spend 3 minutes talking with Dr. Brent Clark about how the Alliance Leadership Summit came together. This runs about 1 hour.
Dr. Brent Clark, thanks for joining us again on the Illinois Channel as we are gathered here for the first ever Alliance Leadership Summit, bringing together some of the management associations in education. You're one of the leaders that brought this together. What is the purpose?
Well, I think anytime you try to get people together in this type of capacity, you're always looking to raise awareness, gin up experience, and build knowledge for those types of initiatives that you're wanting to advance publicly, either through the legislature or through local government. So the purpose of the summit was to build that experience and raise that awareness.
One of your first speakers here today, who used to work in the U.S. Senate as a staffer, said members of the legislature, members of the Congress get tired of hearing people say, we're against this, we're against this, we're against this. He goes, do you know how old that gets?
Oh, yeah.
And he said, come to the table with solutions.
Right.
You're, again, one of the architects, your association of Vision 2020. Is that, in fact, what you're trying to do?
Well, it started with a simple premise that we were outstanding at knowing what we were against and not very good at knowing what we were for. So Vision 2020 was really rooted in the idea of developing solutions to man-made problems in Illinois and knowing what we were for, things that we would advocate to pursue. So really, we come with a basket of solutions here, and these aren't solutions looking for a problem, these are solutions to problems that currently exist in Illinois today. And we think if you pass these things as a comprehensive package, you really improve the experience and the environment for school children all across Illinois.
And then lastly, as we tape this, it's the day before Governor Rauner delivers his first budget address, so we don't know what he will say. By the time this airs, he will have laid it out. But how important is it, would you say, in general, for you to be having this conference now with a new governor, and given where we are, and everyone knows there's going to have to be a host of reforms coming down the pipe?
I think timing's everything, Terry. It is in life and it is in politics, and this is certainly a mix of politics and life. And having our people here today, sending them to the Capitol tomorrow after the budget address occurs, really not knowing for sure what's in that budget address, having some ideas of what might be in it, but not knowing for sure, having people on the ground, live citizens that are back in those communities that are actually running the schools and visiting with legislators, I think it's critically important, and the timing probably couldn't be much better.
I'm sure you'll have a lot more to say over the course of this spring, and we'll look forward to talking to you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for being here today. Right order. But with us today on the panel is the Executive Directors from the Illinois Association of School Boards, Roger Eddy, the Illinois Association of School Business Officials, Dr. Mike Jacoby, and the Illinois Principals Association, Jason Leahy. As you know, there are 4 pillars that really build the entire Vision 2020 plan. And what we're going to do is we're going to take a pillar apiece. We're going to go through the major elements that we're going to target this legislative session. Then we're going to stop for Q&A so that if there's some questions from the audience that we can dive into a little bit deeper, we're happy to do that for you. So the microphones will still be available for the audience to participate. And then at the end, we've got some thank yous to give out, and then we'll be ready for lunch. So we'll start out with highly effective educators, and I believe that's Roger Eddy.
Thank you, Brent, very much. As Brent mentioned, and for those of you who have your book with you today, if you want to kind of either follow along with that, that'd be great. Or if at the back you want to begin to make some notes related to any of those pillars, we've kind of set up at the very end some blank pages for you with the icon above on the page related to each of these areas. So I'm going to talk about Pillar 1, and that is the pillar that deals with making sure that we have the very best educators we possibly can in administrative and teaching positions in our school. We think that there are some improvements in public policy that can be made that will assist us in attracting and recruiting and attaining those highly effective educators. Now, as you look at this book and you have more time to study it, you'll notice that each of the 4 sections is kind of built in a manner that is similar. First, we talk about our vision. Then we talk about those principles that guided us to our conclusions and what our rationale is. And then we discuss recommended state policy. Now, recommended state policy really means nothing unless it becomes legislation at some point. Not always, because you'll see there are pillars that don't necessarily require legislation. Some of it requires collaboration, some of it requires some working together. But for those policies that require legislation, we also want you to know that we have identified initiatives in each of the 4 pillars, and legislation has been drafted and will be introduced, and you will be kept up to speed as those are introduced. And the other thing to remember is we can't introduce every single aspect all at the same time in 1 year, and that's kind of why we're prioritizing, and we'll talk to you about those priorities as well. But as far as highly effective educators, we've identified through the committee's work some recommended state policy changes. There are 2 major areas. We think we need to recruit and retain high-impact educators, and as Dr. Clark has mentioned, who will argue with that we need to have those educators. So how do we do that? What are the policies? First, we think that the reciprocity agreements between Illinois and other states need to be revamped. I lived and worked on in a small school district on the border between Indiana and Illinois. And I can tell you, as a school superintendent, it was very difficult for us to be able to have a teacher from Indiana move across the border into Illinois, even though they've shown a career of outstanding service and excellent ratings just across the river. They somehow, because of the reciprocity hurdle, couldn't teach in Illinois. And it's the same for administrators. So we believe that it's necessary that we introduce legislation not to make it a less quality educator coming in, but to remove some of those barriers. So one of the pieces of legislation that has been drafted under this pillar that you'll hear more about later is a reciprocity change in public policy. The other thing, number 2, we need to expand the alternative teacher licensure program. Years ago, we had a pretty good alternative education licensure program that allowed individuals who had life experience in many areas, and by the way, vocational education is one of the areas that we really need to look at this alternative certification, but it allowed them to go through a kind of a short course in education and then have a longer period of time when they were under some type of induction and mentoring program, but then at the end, use their career knowledge and experience and expertise to become certified teachers. At this point, those programs just don't exist, and they don't exist because they were tightened to a point that it's almost impossible for secondary institutions to offer these in a manner that is reasonable. We need to go back to that before, when we had those programs available. We also think we need to provide some student loan forgiveness programs. We have to make sure that we provide opportunities, especially in neighborhoods who need those individuals to stay in their neighborhoods to teach, to have an avenue to do that. Now, this is an investment, we believe. Obviously, some of these things come with a cost, but it's also an investment. If we're able to provide some loan forgiveness for teachers who will go to those hard-to-serve schools in neighborhoods where we know that the diversity of the neighborhood requires that we expand the pool of those who are going to be eligible to teach there, it will improve education in those neighborhoods. We also need to establish better partnerships and collaboration with higher education. We've already met with the Board of Higher Ed. Of course, we started meeting with the Board of Higher Education at a time when the Board of Higher Education might have new members, right? Because we're in the middle of this transition. We're going to continue that commitment and meet with the Board of Higher Education to have this greater collaboration between K-12 and teacher preparation and the Board of Higher Ed. The second major area we think needs public policy change is to make sure we provide relevant professional development. We need to fully fund mentoring and induction programs for our new teachers. we have statistics and we understand, and as Ralph said, data should be more important than it is, that a lot of teachers leave our profession within the first several years. And part of the reason is we haven't been able to fund the support systems necessary for proper induction and mentoring programs during those first several years. Now, a lot of local school districts have picked up the burden for that, but it's an investment we should make at the state level. We also need to expand our educator collaboration opportunities, and we have to enhance the ability to function as regional centers for our ROEs and ISCs for efficient delivery of professional development. Now, one of the things that we're going to have to talk about at some point is bringing forward some efficiency plans to go along with our recommendations. And we think this is one of those that could really work for everyone if we're all really kind of working toward that efficiency through the ROEs and the ISCs. Now that ends my portion of the pillars, and I think I'm going to pass it off to Jason for 21st Century Learning.
Good morning. For those of you that have had an opportunity to hear me either speak about this or know me, know that my wife and I, we have a couple of children, 5 to be exact. They're 10, 8, 6, 4, and 2. Unfortunately for me, I married way up. I don't know what that says for Ashley, but thank goodness for me that she's there and doing an outstanding job taking care of them and being a great partner in that. I say that as looking at this initiative for Vision 2020, you know, it was hard not to put my parental hat on much of the time because my kids are 10, 8, 6, 4, and 2 right now, and so we've got a long way to go in the public school system and want to make sure that our kids have the educational experiences necessary that will help them to be successful, and they're getting an outstanding education in the Chatham School District right now. One piece of data, and you'll notice here, let me speak to that briefly about the data that supports this document. One of the things I really appreciate about the Vision 2020 document itself, the team that came together and did this work through the support of the ECRA group, we are looking at a highly researched, highly vetted policy document. If you get to the end of the Vision 2020 document, you'll see that there are 60 sources that are referenced here, and that's one of the things that lends a lot of credibility to this, and one of the reasons why it's made its way into the governor's transition team report as an example. But one of the things that I saw as we were doing the various research for Vision 2020, particularly with 21st Century Learning, was the Torrance test. For those of you that might have heard Yang Zhao at some point in time or read some of his stuff, in his book, World Class Learners, he references some research about the Torrance test and what's happening with that. And if you've never heard of the Torrance test, basically what it is it's an assessment that takes a look at creativity, innovation, and some of those real critical soft skills that we know are important, particularly for the economy of the United States of America. And what the research is showing, though it's not something that we're falling off a cliff per se, we have started to see a decline in our students' creativity, innovation skills, entrepreneurial skills when looking at the Torrance test assessment. And you'll see that referenced here in the 21st Century Learning piece. And as a parent concerned about my kids' educational experience, obviously that's going to get my attention. I think there are many factors involved with that, familial, societal, that could be in play. But I also think when you look at the majority of ed reforms, particularly since Nation at Risk, which is about 30 years or so ago now, we've put a lot of that emphasis on reading and mathematics and then holding schools accountable through assessment. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that reading and math aren't important. They are. I'm not going to say assessment's not important. It is. But we've got to be taking a look at how we're balancing that with everything else that we know is critical for our kids in terms of what they need to know and to be able to do. And we try to come at that in this 21st Century Learning policy piece for Vision 2020. So as you're looking at the document, and if you're in the book, it's on page 17, you'll see what we're going to be looking at in terms of some of our policy recommendations. And as Roger referenced, some of this work can happen in schools with communities right now without necessarily the General Assembly doing anything with it, but some of it will take some policy work. So with developing the whole child, as I've been speaking to, We want to make sure that we're doing a good job with social emotional standards. We want to ensure that there is an emphasis on student creativity and innovation, that they're given the time that they need to lean into their passions and find out what interests them. Promote individualized learning, and that really could take two forms. One is providing students the ability to progress more at their own speed in terms of their academic prowess and maybe moving along quicker than our typical Carnegie unit pace, but also allowing them to lean into the things that they are impassioned and want to be pursuing. In our work with the PTA, we sure appreciate their support and their 100,000 members now backing this, and it's something that's going to give a lot of power as we talk with policymakers. They spoke to us about how we need to ensure that we get engaging parents, family, and community into this document as well, and as we look at developing the whole child, we know that we need that high level of support. Preserving instructional time. Developing a balanced state assessment system. I don't think anybody would argue that. Now, the point of putting this in here isn't to discuss whether we should park the park, okay? That's not the point. But we do know we need to get a better handle on how we're utilizing assessment and shifting the real focus for that, where it currently sits, I believe, more for accountability purposes, back to what it should be used for, and that is to inform the instructional process. And so that's the type of work that we're going to be doing with Vision 2020 as and it's not that we haven't been doing this before, but with a more concerted effort and more stakeholders involved, making sure that we really talk about assessment to inform instruction and help us to know what we need to be doing for kids to help them improve academically. No argument here. In fact, I think those that are early childhood advocates and those of us here, we know that this is important, and I believe it could be one of the few winners in the budget address today will be an investment in early childhood education, and we are obviously going to continue to support those efforts and continue to help kids get what they need so that they're able to be successful throughout their entire educational career and then thereafter. Linking students to college and careers. Roger mentioned when it comes to improving the educator corps, working with higher ed, that's not going to just happen with that. And I think one of the positive byproducts of that we'll have a carryover of that conversation to how we can impact the instructional processes, get better partnerships with higher education, guaranteeing that we get kids the things that they need to be successful, whether it be technical school, community college, four-year degrees, and then also working more closely with the business community. We know a lot of these kinds of things are happening now with vocational programs, CEO programs, technical programs and such, the STEM pathways that are currently being moved forward in the state of Illinois, but we need to see how those quality programs are working and see how we can work to replicate those throughout the state. Beyond that, then, and this is something that we'll see an immediate policy push here, hopefully very soon, expanding equity and technology access, providing high-speed internet connectivity to every school and community. One of the ways that we think we can come at this is expanding the allowances for the sales facility use tax that counties are now passing, and allowing for those to also cover expansions of broadband and technology support in schools. So we're hopeful to see some things happen there. And then also we think we need to incorporate technology into the state learning standards and making sure that there's good correlation between those two things as well. So big drink from the fire hose there with regards to 21st century learning. We know there's many other things that we can be doing, but the group identified these as being most critical as we go through this. And as I pass this thing over to Brent, I'll just mention another thing that I really appreciate about this 21st century learning, or about Vision 2020 in general, is that it is an iterative process. This is just the beginning. And as we continue to check things off the list, we're going to see new things that need to be added and push forward to do what's best for our kids. Brent.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Jason. If you'll turn to page 20 in your journal, you'll see the piece on recommended state policy around shared accountability that I'm going to be taking us through. Page 20 on your journal. There's three pieces under shared accountability that I want to bring your attention to. First, the first piece starts with the membership on the Illinois State Board of Education. This came up throughout the super committee's work time and time again. And I actually pushed back on them saying, are you sure you want this? And if so, why? And their arguments were incredibly compelling. So it came to be a part of this plan that we want to add current educators to the Illinois State Board of Education in the form of a teacher, a principal, a school business official, and a school superintendent. And the reason for that was pretty clear from the group, was that we have to have the voice of that current practitioner, that person that's at the tip of implementation, in the room with the state board when they're having those discussions and making those final decisions, and also when they're setting their lobbying agenda and going to the Capitol and saying whether they're in support or not support of certain bills. We think those current practitioners' voice has to be a part of that discussion in setting their agenda. There's virtually no way, and this was always the concern, there's virtually no way for a singular member of the state board to so tilt the board and their decisions to favor their classroom, their building, their district. It's just really not conceivable. So we think there's a workaround on that, and we do have language that's going to be introduced very soon that will take us down that road as openings occur in the future on the Illinois State Board of Education. The second piece talks about a differentiated accountability model, and this goes back to the waiver that Illinois currently has from NCLB. So there are three components that will make up our differentiated accountability legislation. And that is two things that you would realize and recommend, or you would recognize from the past. First is this: student growth. There's going to be a piece in there, about a third of it will be on, are the students learning and growing over time? Will you be able to demonstrate that? The second piece is the compliance probe that is administered by the Regional Office of Education. Are you following the current statutes according to the way you're supposed to be operating your district? Part two. That's part two. Part three is this. This is the new part. And it's really the part where you add value. It's the question, are you adding value to your community? What do you do that's uniquely beneficial to your students and for your community? And we've given examples as we've hosted the super region meetings across the state. And as I've been out, I've found more and more and more examples, because I know every district's doing something that's unique. So here's a couple examples. I was in Leiden Township High School District last Wednesday or Thursday night with Nick Polyak and their board, and I think 7 or 8 other area districts were there as well. And it was a very nice meeting. We were talking about Vision 2020, but preliminary to that meeting, Superintendent Polyak was telling me about all of the vocational courses that they are offering their students and how they have coordinated that with the companies, the manufacturers, if you will, in their area, and how that those manufacturers are feeding the district information, how the district's feeding that information back to those manufacturers, and how those students are able to come out of college, or come out of high school, not college, but come out of high school and earn $18 and $20 an hour with knowledge and skills that they learned in high school. That's the value, that's the context. That's what those students are expecting. That's what those taxpayers are expecting. That's what they're paying for. And that's the value and the context that they're adding to their community. We believe that in this accountability model, every district should get the chance to show that off and tell the world, this is the value we're adding to this community. This is what we're putting on the street. This is how we're improving the lives of the people that are making the investment. Not only the local taxpayer, but the state of Illinois. So that's the unique part of the new accountability model that we will be bringing to the street. You have to remember, we have to keep the student growth piece in there in order to stay in compliance with the federal law, which is the NCLB waiver. I really don't think we want to lose that waiver because of the onerous regulations that come with it, but also the money that comes from it from the federal government. So we don't give that up, but we want to open up the door for local districts to be able to show value and show off, if you will, what you do that's really great for your community. So that's the second piece of shared accountability. The third is this, and this is an old story, but it's a new tack on this, and it's mandates. And we've had a long track record, and you heard Ben Schwarm yesterday talking about mandates, and there was a question from the audience, how many unfunded mandates are there? And there's probably, well, we know there's many. There's over 200, but it might be 400. It might be 600 on how you count them. But here's the tack we're taking under this plan, Vision 2020. It's this. Because we've had these arguments where we've tried to take mandates on one by one, and it's proven to be politically challenging, if not impossible, to knock them off one by one because you're just picking on one particular segment. So the tack is this under this plan. First, things that would stay on the table would be these things. Things that are fully funded, things that are federally required by federal law, things that are civil rights issues, things that are student safety issues, because we've historically, the first thing we get thrown at us when we say we want unfunded mandate relief is, well, are you going to stop doing criminal background checks? No. Okay, no board member, no superintendent that's thinking would vote to not do criminal background checks in their district. So we want to clear the deck of that type of conversational clutter, if you will, and just say, if it's student safety, if it's civil rights, if it's federally required, and if it's funded, stays on the table. But if it's not, it's up for grabs. And we want to have the ability at the local level for the local board, the local team, to talk about and discuss how you want to invest your resources and what types of returns you want in your district. And you ought to have the chance to do that, particularly around operational type issues that relate to non-instructional types of services. We think we were trying to calculate this last night because we constantly get asked this question by not only the administration of the Rauner team, but also individual legislators. They'll say, well, how many dollars will it be if we do unfunded mandates? You can't quantify that precisely across this state, and because the way you would implement unfunded mandate relief in your district would probably be 850 different ways, because you will look at things differently, and you may implement some mandates, you may opt out of others. So there would be it'd be impossible to calculate up front what that would be, but we're looking at a way to do it on a per pupil average of what we think we could get to. And suffice it to say, it is somewhere around $2 billion just on a back of a napkin calculation at the Globe last night. So, you know, we might want to run that through a calculator when we get some numbers, you know, but the napkin started it out. But there's a lot, just leave it this way, there's a lot of money on the table with the unfunded mandate piece. And we want to back into this in a way that legislators can feel comfortable about going down this path, because it's an uncomfortable conversation for them to have. And I've given this example before, but this is the way it gets sensationalized and becomes very emotional. Last October, there was a legislative race in Lake County. Now, leaving names out of this. In that race, a particular candidate simply made the statement, if I'm elected, I would be willing to discuss unfunded mandates. The next day, that person had a flyer out against them that said they wanted child predators in the classroom. Source, ISA, because we talk about unfunded mandates all the time. So we have to recognize the political and emotional environment that we're in and try to back into this logically with this conversation. So today, when you're at the Capitol, if you happen to start talking about this particular sheet on unfunded mandate relief, you need to be well-versed on these things. It's on page 20, and you're going to want to underline this. It's kind of middle of the page. We're not talking about things that are funded, federally required, student safety, or civil rights. We're saying those are on the table. So be well-versed if you start to talk about mandate relief, because the legislator is going to want to know, how are you getting at this? And if we all come in with that same consistent message, it will begin to build that resonant voice that we need in the Capitol. So that concludes shared accountability, and I'll turn it over to the money with Mike Jacoby.
Looking at equitable and adequate funding, and our policy recommendations are on pages 22 and 23. And I'm going to start at the end of that and work back so that we can talk about the evidence-based model of adequacy as sort of our last point. One of the things that we really spent a lot of time talking about among our committee as we worked through these pillars was the idea that we need to get rid of some of the barriers there are to districts actually behaving fiscally responsibly and efficiently. And there are a couple areas of focus that I think are worthy of mentioning. One of those is a mandate, the third-party contracting mandate, which we hope would fit into that discretionary bucket and give you some opportunities to do some things differently at the local level. Another one has to do with the timing of budgets, the timing of reduction in force, the timing of when we know about revenues and when we have to make decisions, and just the general lack of information we have from year to year on what we can project state funding will look like for schools. I think as Ralph mentioned, at his district, they just assume a decrease in state funding and kind of throw it away. But not every district can do that because it's an important revenue to them. And so our dialogue centered around how can we get a better scenario for planning in regard to state resources and so forth. And so we talked about a 2-year budget cycle. That if we could get some commitment from legislators to not only talk about what funding for education is going to look like for this year, but also project for us what it might look like next year related to state resources. When we get to our talking about our adequacy model and how to implement that, you'll see that there's some opportunities for that to actually take place as well. It's very difficult to do that. Our Constitution in Illinois calls for a 1-year budget. Most people don't know this, but before the Constitutional Convention in 1970, we actually had a 2-year budget cycle in Illinois. And there are about 14 states in the nation that currently do 2-year budget cycles, which really helps, in terms of planning and taking sort of the fiscal decisions of the legislature out of the political realm as well. But we don't have that in Illinois. But there are some ways that we can go about that. One of the things we're working on for this year is just a resolution, just to say that legislators are committed to trying to communicate what future funding will look like for schools down the road. And in some ways, that's just planting seeds for our evidence-based model and where that might go after this year. Another piece that's not actually on our stated agenda right now is the idea of reduction in force. You're making decisions about RIFs in April, and many of you don't know what your budget's going to look like till after the legislature finishes its work. And while that's not necessarily one of the Vision 2020 policy initiatives, it does fit under this larger category of enhancing your ability to be more efficient and more accurate in your employee decisions. And so we are working on legislation as an alliance that would try to change that timetable and maybe move it to 30 days after the budget is determined by the legislature. That's a controversial issue, and we know there'll be some blowback from the unions on that, but that's another important piece that I think fits in this fiscal efficiency kind of category. We've already talked about stabilizing state funding for education by doing a couple things. One of those is to get the state's financial house in order. And we don't need to say more about that because Ralph did communicate that. But I will say this, that we will have that presentation up on the website for this event today. And it's also on IASA's website already. And we'll get it on the IASBA website as soon as I get a copy of that. In addition, Terry back here with the Illinois Channel has been videotaping. And if you, on Monday, can tune in. It's youtube.com, and most of you know how to do YouTube, right? All right, so if you just look for IllinoisChannelTV all together and put that in there in that search, you're going to probably find that he's posted these sessions on Monday on YouTube. Okay, YouTube, Illinois Channel TV. In terms of the evidence-based model, because that's probably the biggest piece that we have on the table right now on this funding side. And I hope you're paying attention. We had a press conference last week on February 12th, and we had Senator Barackman, who was a senator out of the Bloomington area. We did a press conference in Bloomington and one in Springfield, focused on our advancement of an evidence-based model of adequacy and equity into this year's session. We're working on language on that. We're probably as close to final as we can be in regard to that, and that probably will be announced later this week. The language that we're working on is to establish a professional judgment panel that would take some time to update a study that's already been done in Illinois. We already have an evidence-based model that's been developed for Illinois by educators and other kinds of constituents. That was done in 2008 to 2010, and a report was issued. Ralph referenced that, and we've all studied that, and matter of fact, Roger and I both sat on that task force and worked on that together. But we need to renew that. That needs to be updated. So we see a professional panel of folks coming together to renew and update that particular study. In addition to that, there have to be some decisions made by that panel. One of those is what's the amount of local support that we're going to sort of count. in any sort of dialogue about what's state support and what's local support. You know now in our current GSA formula there's a tax rate. It's $3 for a $3 tax rate for a unit district, and there's a different tax rate for elementary and then high school. And that's basically to say there's a local share. There's a local share that's anticipated or expected. So that panel will need to take a look at that. And we need to probably update our thinking on what that is based upon the current economy, based on currently what's happening in schools. The second thing that has to happen in regard to that evidence-based model is the costing out. Now, one of the things we really love about this model is that it is scalable, and that's a really important term to use. It's in your notes and your talking points on this particular model. And what's important about that is this: we don't have to have $3 billion all at one time to fund adequacy, but we can get to adequacy over time. And even in our language in our bill, we're charging this task force or this panel to develop a model for the state that would get it to fully funding adequacy by 2021. I know this is Vision 2020, but we're going to stretch that to 2021, just to give us a little bit more time to get there. In the past, before the Great Recession, we expected somewhere between $300 and $400 million more in spending toward education on a regular basis. I think some of that's going to return if we can get the state's house in order a little bit, and there's really no reason why we can't expect that we'll see that pattern emerge again. Well, if it does, we want it to be scaled into this plan, not just be arbitrary or used for other mandates or other kinds of things like that. The other piece that's really important about our legislation on this is that there are no losers in what we're charging this panel to do, because we're starting with this assumption that the revenues that districts receive this year from state sources would not be diminished. So we're going to kind of take that pension kind of language a little bit into this dialogue. We're not going to diminish any resources that are currently on the table for folks. Now, in reality, if you're thinking about how to implement this over time, that probably means those who are at the very top end of the scale in terms of student spending right now might see a freeze in their state revenues for a period of time, while everyone else kind of catches up to that. But if we really are funding toward total adequacy, I think there'll be a moment in time, and maybe it's down the road, where we'll catch all districts up with increases on the state level and be able to see us funding at a much more appropriate level. When we did our press conferences with Senator Barrickman, here in Springfield, Senator Menard also came and spent time supporting this legislation at that press conference. And some people ask the question, well, why would somebody who's been pushing Senate Bill 16 and now Senate Bill 1, a different model of funding, come in support of our plan for an evidence-based adequacy model? And I think there are a couple reasons, and he articulated them. One, he said, this is a much better model at identifying the target of what spending needs to be for education and how we can get there over time. Two, it is scalable. So we don't have to start with this expectation that we're going to reach the goal today. Because whenever we do that, we end up with nothing. Because people say, well, how can we possibly do that under current financial conditions? And he also is very, I think, articulate in being able to say, I want all the ideas on the table, and I want to support all ideas getting on the table. We don't like this idea of winners and losers, and that's why we've been extremely neutral on both Senate Bill 16 and Senate Bill 1. We just can't find our place in a position to support, but we also don't want to say we're opposed to changing the school aid formula, because we don't think that it is a good formula, that it's the right thing for Illinois schools, that it treats children equally and equitably or adequately. So we have to be in a position where we are advancing something that has meaning, that has depth, that actually is doable over time, and that's what we believe this evidence-based model will be. So that's on the table, and we hope that you get an opportunity to talk about that with legislators when you visit them today.
Let me just kind of wrap up the 4 pillars this way, because I think today our strategy and how you can help is to become familiar with the public policy proposals that are being created around those 4 pillars. And then I'm going to get to the 3 that we're asking you to specifically take position papers to your legislators today and ask that they support immediately, okay? Under highly effective educators, the license reciprocity legislation is going to be filed. Under 21st century learning, as Jason mentioned, the countywide school facility occupation sales tax would be expanded to include technology. And later in the year, by the way, if and when there's a capital bill, it's our intention to get very involved in making sure that there's an adequate amount of money in that for high-speed access for every school district in the state. That will come later. That's why it's not necessarily in here. We will help identify a revenue source to pay for that to be part of the capital bill. Under shared accountability, allowing the current educator representation on the State Board of Education is being drafted and will be introduced. Adopting a differentiated accountability model is being drafted and will be introduced. School district relief of unfunded mandate will be introduced. And under equitable and adequate funding, as Dr. Jacoby mentioned, the evidence-based funding model has already had a press conference. It just didn't have a bill number yet. And we're also going to work on a resolution to make sure that the point gets made about a biannual budget. Now, there are three important documents. That you can get these out front. One is titled at the top, Equitable and Adequate Funding. It allows you to leave something with your representative or senator. Now, the issue for them is the number of people they see this afternoon. And as was mentioned earlier, this budget is going to be ugly for a lot of folks. And they're going to be at the Capitol. And they're going to be competing with you, so to speak, to talk to their representative or senator, and their message is going to be a little bit different because it's going to talk about, hey, we can't survive. Here's what it would do, what this budget will do to us. We hope that this will be a welcome break from that for those representatives and senators. You're going to talk about policies that necessarily don't have to do with the budget or that same theme. So equitable and adequate funding is one. The other one we're asking for a priority today has to do with the unfunded mandate relief. And these sheets are available for you to leave with your name, school district address, email address, because it's important that they know you're going to be watching and who you are. The third one is the highly effective educators piece. So that kind of, I hope, prioritizes for today what we're asking you to do when you go over to the Capitol. Make no mistake, you will be asked about funding. You'll want to talk about the budget because it's going to be, but if you can direct back to these are the priorities that our lobby team is going to be working on in the next several weeks as we introduce legislation. So if there, oh, by the way, there's another ask that you can make that I think is important. Ask them to support it. If you get a positive response, ask them to co-sponsor the legislation when it is filed. Ask them to get on as a co-sponsor. And we'll remind you of that when the bill numbers are generated. We'll send out some information to you to identify these priorities with an actual bill number and ask your representative or senator to co-sponsor the legislation.
I just want to say a couple things too as we kind of wrap today and before we say our final words. People have asked us along the way, why is Vision 2020 different than any other plan that's been coming down the pike in the last 20 years or so? And the thing that makes it different is this. It's you being here, you being committed to advance these ideas with your legislators at a grassroots level. The difference is the collaboration that we have with Craig and Pat as well as our alliance team here. And the difference is being able to engage with parents through organizations like the PTA. Legislators and those who are making policy are going to listen to multiple voices, and when those voices are strong, they will listen, and that will move these kind of things forward. So you do need to take seriously your role at the local level and here in advancing that. That's going to make Vision 2020 a different model than every other plan that's come down the pike. And one other thing, just to kind of reiterate how we're working together. And we have Rosemaria DiBenedetto here in the red, sitting right here in the middle. Sometimes people say, well, you don't have a marketing plan. but we have a marketing team, and Rose Maria is leading that with us. Why do we get in front of editorial boards? Why are we doing press conferences? How are these things kind of happening where we're getting Vision 2020 into the public? Well, it's because we are engaged. She's with Newsmakers, Inc., and doing a great job with us, and she's the other sort of silent partner that we don't typically recognize. But we just want you to know we have a high-level professional that's helping us get in the places we need to get to have the dialogue that we need to have at the highest levels in order to make sure Vision 2020 comes forward. And of course, we hope you all come back for our hospitality tonight. That's going to be really important for you to be there for that time with legislators.
I think we're going to open it up for a few questions, and then we've all got a closing comment or two. So Sarah and Sue, our ladies with the mics, any questions from the field? I see the hands going up.
I want to ask specifically about involvement of the Illinois PTA, because we know when our parents get involved, our legislators really do listen. So I've talked to our PTA presidents. We'll present tomorrow to another group of parent leaders. But they've not heard, at least our parents have not heard from their Illinois PTA too much about it. What's the plan, and how can we, leverage that resource that we have?
So a couple of thoughts with that. I've had multiple conversations with their executive director, Jolene Louder. I believe this past week, due to the help of Mike Chamness, who wrote up a nice article on their behalf, explaining PTA's support now of Vision 2020. That was to be distributed to their entire membership here recently. They are fully supportive of it. They have some information up on their website about it. I'm working right now to coordinate a couple of region meetings up in the North Cook and DuPage areas. Might take care of those myself and be available. But we may need support here from those of you in this room to do exactly what you're doing. I think coming from you from the home base really makes a big difference with that. And I do think it's also worth noting, Illinois PTA is a large organization, it's a powerful organization with the large membership that it has, but not all school districts have a PTA. Some of you have PTOs. And those decisions were made locally, and part of that is they just didn't want to have that connection to the state level association, which is definitely their right to do that. But because of that, for those of you that have PTOs in your organization, they may not be receiving the kinds of information that we're going to be pushing to PTA to then send on to their local school district chapters. So we're going to really need your help with those school districts that have parent-teacher organizations. But beyond those groups, please get in front of your Rotaries, your Chambers of Commerce, your JCs, all of those groups that really do support their public schools. They want them to be successful. They know how important it is to their local communities, their local economies. So please be sure to get out there and do that. But we're working very closely with the PTA, and trust me, they're excited about being involved in the legislative effort, and they are going to be highly engaged. Question over here.
Mike, I've got a question specific for you on the evidence-based model. So I like a lot of the concepts in the model. The one, I guess, concern that I have that I'm hoping you can kind of talk me through is the professional judgment panel, I think, is well-intentioned to make sure that there are sound, rational decisions made about what we should be funding and how that gets scaled. As I look at the way that panel is comprised, it feels a little political in terms of who gets a seat at the table. So how do we make sure that process doesn't get politicized in a way that we aren't really relying on good, sound, professional judgment and evidence, but I've sat on other task forces where everybody just fights because they come at it from a different perspective.
Yeah, I think, first of all, the makeup of that panel includes quite a lot of representation from our groups. So there'll be 12 people from our groups that'll be on that, three each. And then there are a few legislators that will be on that, a couple business people, and some parents. IEA and IFT are going to have some representation there as well, but we kind of kept them at 6, so we can kind of rule over them a little bit. But one of the biggest ways that we're going to, I think, have impact on that is how we staff it. Because one of the questions that always comes up when we're talking about implementing some new task force or panel is, who is going to staff that? And what we've said to date in talking with our legislators on this is that Vision 2020 is going to staff that. And what that does is it gives us the ability to control sort of the scope and the depth and the direction of that dialogue. It'll have to be broad. I mean, we'll have to have everybody's opinions on the table. But also, we're working from an existing model as opposed to this kind of a blank slate. And that will also keep us on track. So as we update elements of a specific model, we won't be, going down a lot of different pathways.
I have a comment or a suggestion on the concept of adding educators to the state board. Could we be a little bit more specific? I'm thinking in terms of a classroom teacher. I would rather see like a third grade teacher who's down there dealing with all the curriculum changes and Common Core and everything, rather than have somebody appointed that's, I don't know, language teacher from U of I or something that's not going to be down in the trenches.
Well, the teacher component of the appointment to the state board, that ultimately becomes the decision of whoever the sitting governor is at that moment. So at this point, it's really just based on political affiliation and really a geographic distribution of where people reside. This brings a whole narrowing of the focus on who those people would be. So the idea of adding a teacher is a big step. I don't know if on our first effort into that foray, if we can get all the way down to the specific definition of a grade level teacher versus, it won't be a U of I because that's a higher ed, but it would, right now it's just generally open to teachers, principals, business officials, and superintendents. And we think that's a huge step in getting that just into the legislation.
My question is for Roger or anyone else on the panel. It has to do with the teacher licensure and reciprocity. I think the new legislation still holds the key piece where they still will have provisional certificates, licenses. And perfect example, I'm fortunate enough to have a teacher that we hired with a doctorate, has a teaching certificate in Ohio and Michigan, and taught for 7 years at Illinois State University as a math methods professor. And to teach in the state of Illinois, he has to take 4 classes. So that piece, I just want to make sure that provisional part is gone because I'm really struggling with that. Thank you.
Yeah, what a perfect description of the lunacy really involved with restricting our ability to hire individuals that local superintendents and boards of education believe will be quality educators and have proven it in other states and have those credentials. I mean, we have to eliminate that type of hurdle. And really, whether or not the person will come to Illinois might have to do with the fact that they have to take those 4 courses, and they might be able to go to a different state and not take those courses. Is there a path? Yes, there's a path, but it's not as smooth as it could or should be for us to attract those out-of-state teachers. So that's a great example of exactly the type of thing we're trying to remove.
Can I just make a couple quick comments with regards to that? We've had a lot of good conversations with the state board with that. Sarah Bocek with IASA, Brian Schwartz, our general counsel, have been working very closely to try to bring some rationality to the reciprocity issue and really lower the hurdle for high-quality people to get in and deal to teach here in Illinois or be a school leader. But I want to emphasize that this is just a patch. This is just a Band-Aid fix to a much larger issue. Again, as we were looking at the research base for Vision 2020, a couple of things that were a bit breathtaking for me personally. If you look at the statistics of education degrees earned, of degrees earned, all degrees earned in higher education about 40 years ago, over 20% of those, between 20 and 25% of those were education degrees. 2010, 2011, so that's 1970, 71. Fast forward 40 years, 2010, 2011, that percentage is now between 5 and 6%. Okay? So we have a lot fewer people getting into this profession, and that is a concern. That's why those of you that are out there trying to hire teachers and principals and superintendents, you're seeing those candidate pools shrink. In the principal ranks in particular, Right now, we had a major overhaul of principal endorsement programs, and currently we have, depending on the figures you're looking at, between 750 and 1,000 people currently being trained to be principals. Now, you have to divide that number by 3 because that represents 3 cohorts. So right now, we're in the ballpark of around 300 to 350 people currently being prepared to be principals per year. That does not even replace the number of people that are either retiring, moving up into other positions, all that. So that is a real problem. We have a lot of Type 75 certified people still out there that are going to carry us for a bit, but that's not going to do it for us long term. So we've got a lot of work to do in this area.
I'm glad that you spoke to that because my daughter just started freshman year of college at SIU Carbondale. When we went to talk to the advisor, she told the advisor she wanted to do music, and the advisor said, "Not music education, right?" And my daughter said, "No, I'm wanting to do music business. Why?" And this advisor went on to tell us how Illinois keeps changing the rules on our education majors to the fact that they can't get out of college because they start out, and here's what the plan's laid out for them when they start out. And then the very next semester, oh, by the way, the state's added something else. And then the next semester, the state's added something else. They can't graduate with an education degree. So they have to work the system to get their education degree. They have to go into major in English, per se, and then worry about getting the education certificate later. Because the state, they're told from the advisors at the universities that the state keeps changing the rules on them so they can't graduate with an education degree. So I think that might be something we need to look towards too, because you just said it. We can't get qualified teachers. The kids aren't graduating with education degrees because they're being, they keep changing the rules on them.
Well, trust this. Through all of these changes, we were trying to make sure we had a rational approach to improving the programs, explain to them what was coming, and now we're there, and now we just have to go back with them with the data to show them. And that's what we plan to do, and really do every day. Trust me, we have these conversations often with the state board and the policymakers.
Okay, I think we're going to take one question and then wrap it up if there's any other questions. Final question.
Hello, there you go. It's not really a question, it's a comment. I want to thank you guys and your staffs for all the work that you've put into this. I know there are a lot of people sitting in this room who have been doing this a longer time than I've been on a school board for 12 years now. This is the first time that I've felt that we're focused and we know where we're going. So I want to thank you guys for that.
You do. Let's go down the line thanking up. You want to start down there with a thank you?
Thanks for that, and I want to say it's been a real pleasure to be a part of it, and in particular I want to thank Dr. Clark and IASA for getting the wheels turning with this. Brent came to my board back in October, I think, of 2012, and presented this concept, and it took, after his presentation was done, about 6 seconds for them to have a motion on the floor and approve getting to be a part of it. So it's been a pleasure for that. And we feel like it's appropriate for us as we wrap up our time here to thank the good work of our staffs that have been involved with this, for my individuals that have been engaged with this process. Julie Weichert, our Associate Director, Pam Burdine, who's our Services Coordinator, doing a lot of work in the background. Other staff that I have here, Don Dillon, one of my field coordinators, Allison Maley, our Government Relations Director, and Brian Schwartz, Associate Director, General Counsel, are around here a bit as well. I think I have a couple board members here also, Aaron Llewellyn, who represents our Two Rivers region, and Kathy Clark, who's our legislative chair. So I want to thank them as well. And I'm sure sorry if I missed anybody.
Same for me. I think it's been a great sort of experience to come together and work on this as a team. And I think you're kind of seeing we work together very, very, very well. Some of my staff members that have been involved in this as well. Sue Bertrand is here as our Assistant Executive Director, one of the partners that helped work on this event, along with Sherry and Jean and others from the other associations.
I'll get mine.
You get yours? Okay. And I have board members here as well that have been very supportive of this process and have been involved in the dialogue. Our president, current president, Nelson Gray is here. Our immediate past president, Mark Stalin, was with us as we worked through the process of identifying the pillars. Susan Harkin is our president-elect. Kathy Johnson is here as one of our directors. And without the support at the association level in regard to our leadership, you really can't do these kinds of things because it does take commitment and it does take time. And there's one other person that most of you know, especially if you're in education, that we just can never forget to mention because he does work all across the state for you in many, many ways, and that's Cal Jackson. I know it's Cal here. Where are you? So look for Cal. Matter of fact, he races me up the steps in the Capitol. He's really
And he wins.
He wins. And we also have Lyndall Schuster here from our board of directors as well.
Okay, if I could just have my officers that are here. Karen Fisher is here. Would you stand? Phil Pritzker and Dale Hansen. These are three officers, our top three officers from the association. They've been involved with this from the beginning. I want to thank them for being here. Similar, how long did it take your board to say yes?
About 10 seconds.
Ours was 5.
Oh.
No, I'm kidding. I'm joking, of course. Could I have all of the IASB staff members that are here stand up? I don't want to miss any of you. I'm not going to mention all your names, but I want our IASB staff that have supported this to please stand up. Thank you for being here and all the work that you've done on this. I do want to point out two in particular, one who was our point person from our shop, from the coordinating committee all the way through the details, and that is Dean Langdon. Dean is in the back. Thank you. And the other would be Ben Schwarm, who's the deputy director of the association. He also is responsible for the legislative work. And Ben, as you know, this is just getting started for you, but I want to thank you for bringing it this far.
So I'm the only thing between you and lunch, so we'll make this quick. The ISA president, Scott Cuffle, is here. Scott, please stand. Jane Westerhold, our president-elect, and our past president, Steve Webb. I think 2 or 3 of them are in the room, so, well, our staff also worked pretty diligently on this. I want to have them stand. Sherry Middleton in the back, Diane Hendren, Sarah Bocek, Mike Chamness, Gary Zabilka, Bill Phillips, and Nick Osborne, and Rich Volts. Thank you all for helping make this a success.
You're watching the Illinois Channel, an independent nonprofit corporation formed to provide gavel-to-gavel coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois.